Something is feeding this fire very hot, though. Oh, here's talking about firefighting. See the water coming in from the left? They're putting water on the fire right now, trying to knock it down. And as they cool the fire down, you'll see the color of the smoke change. But it'll be interesting to see how effective this water on it is, whether that puts it out or whether they need to add something additional to it.
It is interesting, though, that in just the last several hours, we've seen several fires, I say several, at least 3 of them, very much like this, that appear to be in the center of the city, that appear to have a significant source of fuel, perhaps explosives, but clearly something that the U.S. has targeted that produces that secondary explosion effect. And Carl, I know for a bomber pilot, that's what he wants to see behind in his rearview mirror, if you will, as he pulls off a target, is something exploding multiple times.
Absolutely fascinating when you lay ordnance on target. The one sign that you have hit what you intended to is the secondary explosion. You know that you hit something important when it blows up when you hit it. A lot of times you hit buildings, what you see is the fire and splash of the bomb, and that's it. You don't see much more than the bomb itself knocking the building down. And as you well know, wood, mortar does not produce the kind of fire like this. This is going down to some extent as the water goes on it. They're trying to cool that down. It'd be very interesting to know what that target is, and I suspect the U.S. will know. They may know exactly what they were hitting, and they may have hit exactly what they intended. One hopes that that's the case, but tomorrow when they get to fly over it in the daytime and get a look down at it, they may or may not tell us what they hit. We hope so. It'd be interesting to know what that was, and also the one earlier, because it really was a tremendous fire, and particularly the earlier one, constant explosions rocketing out of that area.
And I want to tell you, I just found that picture I was talking about. We're going to try and get a camera on it. It's a picture of a building with the 40 on it, and it will, I think, confirm what I suspected, that it is the near the Ministry of Information. In fact, we're focusing up on this snapshot right now that I've got here, and we're going to show it to you in a second. Look at the 40 there. This is me, and let me see if I can find the 40 right here. Well, you got to move there. Right.
Can they zoom in?
There's the 40 right there where my thumb is. That's the same.
And Lester, how high up off the ground are you? Are you on the ground level or on a roof?
We only went up 2 stories. That was the roof of the Information Ministry. I clearly had a mustache back then. The roof of the Information Ministry, those were government buildings. And if I recall at the time, not far from here, one of these buildings actually had an anti-aircraft gun on it. We obviously weren't allowed to shoot that. But again, you're seeing me in this picture on the roof of the Information Ministry, and if you look to the picture to your right, in the upper left of that corner, you'll see 40 on the building, so it appears to be the same building. So I think, in fact, that's what you're looking at, is something nestled between the Information Ministry and that other government building.
100 yards or so. All right, here is, we saw something in the bottom of the screen. Can we move the bottom flags? There's some writing right across the bottom of the screen and see what that says. Or we can't tilt the camera down.
Can't you? But you know, that is, in fact, that's, I believe, if you lose the banner, I believe that is where our correspondents have been standing.
28 April Shopping something or other center?
Yeah, it's a 28 April Shopping Center. And in fact, I'm looking again, this is the view I think we saw during all the months leading up to the war, where we saw our correspondents, their camera position. So that again suggests this is right by the Information Ministry. Part of the Information Ministry, I understand, was destroyed or badly damaged in that cruise missile attack, that explosion that played out right in front of our camera. It would have been Friday, I think Friday afternoon, our time.
Lester, is that the only hit that we see? There's your overflash, if you will, your flashback of your fire. One of the things that is particularly interesting when they train Navy firefighters on board ships is to look for an overflash or a flashback, because you not only have to put the fire out, you have to cool the surroundings cool enough so that it doesn't flash back of its own accord as soon as you take the water off of it and oxygen gets back to the fire. The idea with the fire firefighter is to deprive the fire of oxygen so it will go out, and that's why they're putting all the water in there. But it looks like it's flaring back up from time to time. I'd say it looks maybe like they're getting it under control.
And I can tell you, we're at the quarter hour. If you're just tuning in, let's recap what it is you're seeing and what's occurred within the last 15 minutes. Another explosion in the center of Baghdad, and this one producing a very, very brilliant and explosive fire, now beginning to die out. And we've concluded this is very, very close to the Ministry of Information, which was targeted by a cruise missile just 2 nights ago. This, I can tell you, is a very dense urban area, mostly government buildings, however. I don't recall any residences around there, but predominantly government buildings, and we can't quite see what was targeted, but it seems to be nestled between the Ministry of Information, where this picture we believe is coming from, and that government building with the 4-0.
And Lester, you know, we've been told all along that in the basement of the Ministry of Information, below where the correspondents were working, there was command and control equipment, command and control facilities, and they actually wanted to take it out during the first Desert Storm, but didn't because so many Western journalists had been using that area, but they very much wanted to put some strikes into the basement of that building. So maybe this is what they're doing, because we know that Peter told us that at night they have been, those who had been working at the Ministry of Information left to go to the Palestinian Hotel, and they didn't work in the information building. Now it looks like they may be hitting targets in that area, and that may be what they are trying to do, get into some of that command and control facilities. We know that's on the list. By the way, we're told that a lot of the concentration is now moving out into the area. They are hitting about 60% of their airstrikes are pointed toward the Medina and Hammurabi Republican Guard units. They want to soften them up, take them down, knock out tanks and artillery, and that's because it looks very much like they're trying to get all their ducks in a row to at some point either assault Baghdad or cut it off, or however they want to do it. Big thing is to take down Saddam Hussein. They haven't done that yet. They want to cut off the head of the operation. Now, this is the interesting, Lester, this is the earlier flyer. I don't know if you watched it before you came in, but this fire, as it burned on, you could see it would flare up. You would see it looked like some sort of explosives going off in it. And
although I'm told this may, actually this is, I think, another angle of the same fire.
Oh, okay. I thought that was an earlier shot. Be interesting to take a look and compare the two. So at this angle, it looks like it's still burning quite hot.
Well, let me bring Rick Francona in here, retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. Rick, when you see, and I can give you a bit of perspective, I believe that building back there is about 7, maybe 8 stories tall. So whatever is hit is likely right there at street level. Do you detect a change in the targeting here, or is there simply not enough information to conclude that?
Well, you know, it's hard to tell what it is, but you're exactly right with the location of that. That market is right across the street from the Ministry of Information, and we used to refer to that as the duty-free market, hard currency. But you know, and it's right behind that. But given the intensity of those flames, though, and it's still being fueled, you know, I'm curious to what it would be. I don't recall anything being over there.
I can't recall anything there. There were those government buildings with the numbers on them that I remember quite vividly. At street level, I can't imagine. Now, I'm wondering if, and I don't want to put you on a limb, I'm wondering if there may be military vehicles that the U.S. is targeting in the streets.
Or a petroleum lubricant storage area. I think you were right there. Also, we want to, you know, you recall that, you know, there are a lot of SAM sites still in existence in the Baghdad area that have not been taken out by air defenses yet because they've not brought the radars online. And, you know, the fuel used for the surface-to-air missile system is highly volatile, and if they struck one of those fuel depots, you'd see this kind of flame.
Rick, I wonder to what extent that you know that they have natural gas. Certainly they have plenty of oil and gas in that country. Do they run natural gas into and around the city for cooking purposes, industrial purposes, restaurants or things like that? Because that's not unlike a trunk line of natural gas, what it might look like, with a lot of gas under pressure continuing to burn very hot. And, you know, you can wet it all you want, but the only way you're really going to stop it is shut off the gas supply coming in, then wet it down, as long as gas continues to pump into the area. I wonder if they do that, and I'm not that familiar.
Well, you know, of course, the main distribution centers, of course, would have that, but as I recall, most of the places use the tanks, the very large propane tanks. Even outside the hotels, you would see a string of of the large tanks. So it may have been something like that, but this looks bigger than that. I think you're right. It might be maybe a central distribution center.
And it looks like it's largely died down now as we continue to look in that direction. So they got it out, but it has been extraordinary in the last several hours. Though we have seen what seemed to be not necessarily huge buildings targeted, but something smaller producing an awful lot of fire. And certainly this explosion produced quite a bit of brilliant flame, and for a good time. In fact, I think we're going to re-rack the tape here, and if you're just joining us, and show you what was struck. And this is smack dab in the middle.
Lester, while they're reloading the tape, let me make an interesting observation. Where were we last night about this time? Same place? Same scene? Different target?
Yeah, this is tape here.
No, but my point is just about the same time of day. The strikes went in yesterday, about the same time of day today. Strikes in.
And that's the picture we saw just a few minutes ago when it was burning at its most brilliant stage here. Whatever this was that was struck, certainly offering that fire plenty of fuel.
Yeah, and Lester, if I might, this also looks like the same kind of flame we were seeing yesterday. Remember that, Carl? That same kind of ignition.
I do, and the dark smoke right there clearly indicative of probably some kind of petroleum product burning.
This is also very close to the telecommunications center, which was struck about, I think that would have been 3 nights ago. So the U.S. airstrikes continuing to hit targets deep in very urban sections.
These all appear to be on the west bank of the Tigris there, deep in in that what we would call like the federal enclave, all those government buildings.
Actually, I'm looking here. This might be on the east bank. I'm looking at a map now. A good part of the initial hits were in fact on. No, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. The East Bank.
You know, it's interesting, Lester. This is a replay of what we saw earlier, but you notice the fire hoses coming in now. We saw one line laid on, and then a second one laid on. But later on, as the fire continued to burn, I didn't see the water being poured on the fire anymore. I don't know whether they pulled back because of the nature of what it was, or went in some other direction. But
this appears to be the live picture here again, looking over that shopping center, and then this is back to the tape here. But this is between the Ministry of Information, the shopping center, and then some other government buildings. Never did figure out what those buildings were. It is possible they were housing. I had always assumed they were offices, but had big numbers on them. You see the 40 in the background there, and there are a number of them over a several block area in downtown Baghdad.
Well, you know, certainly, Lester, you've been there. You know exactly where it is. The maps that they use from the satellite maps and the YouTube maps that they've created, and by the way, the whole world is stored in systems that are accessible by the Global Positioning Satellite System. In the aircraft that I fly, I use a Western database, so I have mostly everything in the United States and that area stored in it, but you can also put this database in your GPS and your little computer, and you can call up coordinates exactly there, and then you can program a weapon to hit almost anything. And you know, we talk about CEP. What you do to figure that out is you pick a point and then you aim at it, and how close you come to hitting that point is what the CEP is. And Rick, if I'm correct, you're talking about roughly 3 meters is all they'll talk about published, the accuracy of it?
That's what they're publishing for the GPS bombs, yes.
Which means it's probably more accurate than that.
I'd have to assume so. You know, you look at the ability to pinpoint strike something this small is quite amazing, much more accurate than we had in the last war.
I also want to get some sense from you gentlemen. Here we're seeing clearly something burn nestled among high-rise buildings maybe 7, 8 or taller. A satellite bomb presumably is coming in at an angle. Since it's a standoff weapon, it's gliding to the target. How does it, and maybe we're talking a cruise missile here, but how does it negotiate the taller buildings around it to hit the target without striking anything on the way in?
Well, I can help you a little bit. Maybe Rick can help you a little more than that. The Global Positioning Satellite System driving into the appropriate software not only gives you heading and azimuth, but it will tell you how high you are. You'll get a digital altitude altitude readout on the screen of my computer, and I'm assuming they're doing the same thing on this. The GPS, because it works on time signatures, the amount of time for a signal to go from one satellite to the receiver, another one, and it takes 5 or 6 and compares them and analyzes them. And it not only will tell you which way you want to go, which way you are going, but it will tell you what altitude you are. It would be easy enough to program the software of a computer system driving what I would assume to be a 3-axis autopilot in this weapon system. This is a little complex, but it could tell the weapon system, you know, stay at this altitude, and when you go beyond a certain point, now you need to descend down, and it would just push the nose over and head it on in.
Yeah. It is fascinating technology. It's also destructive technology, as we've seen time and time again. This is one of the more vivid views. Certainly there have likely been, and when we know there have been bigger fires, bigger explosions in Baghdad. This one very, very close to our camera, though, and you're getting an idea of the U.S. military's ability to strike targets even deep within the urban jungle, if you will, of Baghdad. Not quite sure what was hit, again, near the information ministry, near some government buildings, a single explosion. Certainly the nature of the way these attacks have rolled through Baghdad over the better part of a week have changed from a cluster of explosions to very often one very targeted explosion and then nothing, and no chance for even the sirens, no warning, no reaction from anti-aircraft guns. Occasionally they will light up, but so far they have not found their mark against any Allied aircraft. Impossible to tell you right now if this actually even came from a bomb, a cruise missile, or was perhaps sent in some other form or fashion. All we can tell you is it burned quite brilliantly for a better part of 20 minutes. This is the tape from just a short time ago in Baghdad of another very vivid strike. Apparently by the U.S. military. Live picture right now, the Baghdad skyline from that same camera position. That fire is out. What we don't know and may not know for some time is exactly what it hit. Sometimes journalists are taken to see the locations of strikes, but they are clearly up to the minders, the Minister of Information, as to what they will see and when they will see it. We'll continue to look into this aspect of the story as we watch other moving parts of Operation Iraqi Freedom play out across the whole of Iraq. Our coverage picks up again after this. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The latest, these pictures, we saw it play out live here a few moments ago. That intense fire after another explosion wrecked central Baghdad. This view from the Ministry of Information, it may have been targeted, and we say may, just an examination of the maps, may have been targeted near the radio and TV telecommunications center. We know the U.S. tried to put the lights out at Iraqi TV several nights ago. This could be another attempt. All we can tell you is it's in that direction. It burned quite intensely for about 20 minutes. Other headlines we're watching now at the top of the hour. In southern Iraq, the British Royal Marines are fighting the Iraqi paramilitaries near Basra. According to British officials, some Iraqis were captured and a Republican Guard colonel was killed. One British soldier was killed in the action in the south. Several others were injured. In the north, the Central Command says U.S. forces seized a major terror camp. It's widely reported to be an al-Qaeda training camp. U.S. officials say there is evidence that in the past the camp has produced toxins, including ricin. Officials say about 50 Tomahawk missiles were fired in capturing that camp. There's possible new evidence that Iraqis plan chemical attacks. Central Command says U.S. Marines seized Iraqi army buildings in Nasiriya, scene of a 3-day-long battle. Besides a large cache of weapons, the Marines also reportedly captured chemical decontamination equipment and several hundred chemical suits. You can get the latest anytime on the web at iraq.msnbc.com for complete coverage. And of course, we bring you updates every 15 minutes. Now a look at what's happening on the battlefield. For that, we go to retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona. Hello again, Rick.
Hi. Well, Lester, just following up with what we were talking about earlier, just in the last half an hour, we saw air attacks on the central city of Baghdad. Now, this attack was directly across the street from the Ministry of Information and striking an unknown target. What was interesting about this is it shows that the U.S. is continuing this air assault unabated through all hours of the day and night. Also important to note that during this attack, we didn't notice any air raid sirens, nor did we notice any AAA, anti-aircraft artillery, going up. So one could conclude that either their air defenses are being degraded even further, or that this may have come from some sort of ground explosion. This was a large fire. There were a lot of fueled explosions afterwards, so it appears that this was a hit on a petroleum area or some sort of fuel area. And this is what's continuing now. Lester?
Rick Francona. Rick, thanks so much. U.S. forces are securing Iraqi towns as they continue their trek to Baghdad, but they continue to encounter, in some places, stiff resistance. NBC's Dana Lewis is embedded with the Army's 101st Airborne Division and has this report from the front lines.
Hello, we are still with the 2nd Brigade of the 101st Airborne, the Strike Brigade, in the town of Kifl. Overnight, there has still been more fighting in this town. Mortars fired, some sniper fire, and again, they've been running at checkpoints, even if they're manned by tanks. Last night, a dump truck, they say, full of Iraqi soldiers came in here. They ran at one of the tanks. They were only armed with AK-47s. And of course, the tanks, armed by American soldiers, manned by American soldiers, have no choice but to open up. And that's what they did last night. In the town, you don't see very many people. But today, we've started to see some beginning to filter back. One of the translators working for the Army today told me that they were very scared to be here when the Americans first came, but now residents are beginning to see that the U.S. forces will not harm them as long as they approach them slowly with their hands up, with white flags, and so they're beginning to come back to normal. We've also been told about the 101st Apache attack helicopter, several of them damaged in the last couple of days only by sandstorms. When they flew, 2 have been destroyed. They crash landed. The pilots were okay, but because of that, one of the commanders is saying that they will not be flying night missions if it is at all avoidable. These little towns tying up U.S. forces still because of the resistance that continues. Perhaps Saddam Hussein is hoping that if he can push forces into these areas, American forces will be delayed in pushing north to Baghdad. But right now, the 101st out in the street, searching buildings, room by room, block by block, and slowly as they get control of these areas, they'll begin to push north along with the mechanized infantry towards Baghdad. Back to you.
Dana Lewis, somewhere south of Baghdad. Let's go to the northern front now, where U.S. bombers have been hitting Iraqi positions hard in and around Kirkuk, and at this hour in an effort to protect Iraqi oil fields in that region. NBC's Tom Aspel reports now from northern Iraq with the latest from the region of the war.
Well, we're speaking to you from Sulaymaniyah. That's a Kurdish city about 70 miles east of the oil town of Kirkuk. That's one of the main oil fields in northern Iraq, a glittering prize sought by the Allies for 2 reasons. 1, to make sure that the Iraqis don't sabotage those oil fields, and 2, to get their hands on it and pump that oil through north into the Mediterranean pipeline and up into the Turkish pipeline. Now, at the moment, we understand that Kirkuk is defended by at least 1 Iraqi Republican Guard division and probably 2 regular Iraqi divisions as well. And for that reason, the Americans not too anxious to engage them yet until they get more powerful forces on the ground. Now, since last Wednesday night, over the past slightly north of here, about 110, 120 miles north of here, there is an airfield called Bashir, and the American Air Force has been flying in there with 8 or 12 C-17s every night, coming in under blackout conditions, the pilots wearing night vision equipment, landing totally manually without any kind of instruments on the ground, any kind of beacon. The CRG group has a bunch of about 200 men on the ground. They can unload 2 of these giant C-17s in 30 minutes. They sit on the tarmac, on the edge of the tarmac there with their engines still running hot. There are teams that come out wearing night vision equipment to unload pallets, vehicles for the 173 Infantry Division, which has accompanied them in here. Now, primarily, the 173 Brigade is engaged in airport security. They want to make sure that airport remains open, so keeping the American options open to bring different kinds of troops or more men and materiel here, should there be a northern front. But as I said earlier, no evidence that we've seen of any kind of American buildup of any kind of fighting force capable of taking on that Iraqi Republican Guard division in the city of Kirkuk itself.
Tom Aspel in northern Iraq. Just how long might a war in Iraq last? It's a question a lot of people are trying to answer right now. Earlier today, one congressional leader spoke to MSNBC's Ashley Banfield about that very subject. She files this report.
Lester, obviously families who were concerned the day their loved ones left from the 101st Airborne Division here at Fort Campbell for the Gulf have had 12 days almost to digest some of the news that's been coming back from overseas, and that is a difficult time, not only for America, but certainly for the people who are in the line of fire. Because of that, Senator Bill Frisk, the Senate Majority Leader, a very high-profile politician, made a visit down here. He came to speak with the families of the 101st Airborne Division and go to church with them as well, and he also made himself available to the media for a very brief time, in which he answered a number of questions, not only about the length of this war, how the war is going, how Capitol Hill is united, and what he thinks about the campaign so far. I can tell you this, he did say it is crystal clear that the United States is going to win this campaign. He also called Saddam Hussein a serial killer, and he suggested that the worst is yet to come in this war and that America needs to be prepared. I asked him specifically how long he believes this campaign is going to go on, given what we've seen over the last 11 days. Have a listen.
I think what people have realized over the last several days, recognizing that we are now just 11 days into what is a very large task when we're saying we're going to change a regime of an oppressive government, of a tyranny itself, and liberate a nation of people. To liberate a nation of people, that this will be a much longer road than people had anticipated. And I'm speaking mainly of the American people. And I think that it will be months. I think that it will take a concerted effort, a focused effort, a continuation of the excellent progress that is being made today.
Lester, we should also tell you that with regard to the amount of money this war is costing, the senator said he fully backs the emergency spending request from the president of $74.7 billion. And Senator Frisk broke it down for us, too, suggesting that $64 billion worth of that is earmarked for prosecuting this war. $4.5 billion is earmarked for homeland security costs during this war. And the remaining $6.2 billion is scheduled for the international operations relating to those first two costs. He also said, when I asked him, when does the grace period of debate and also criticism of this war end on Capitol Hill? And he said, now is the time for uniting behind this president, but it's just fine for anyone out in the public to speak freely, because that's what these people are fighting for overseas. That's the story from here at Fort Campbell. Lester, back to you.
All right, Ashley Banfield, thanks. We want to check in now with Central Command Headquarters. There's news the 101st Airborne Division preparing for possible door-to-door combat in the city of Najaf. NBC's David Schuster is at CENTCOM headquarters. And before we get to that, David, I know the Pentagon doesn't give you target by target by target yet. Is there any sense as to what we saw burning in Baghdad about a half hour ago?
Lester, we believe that it was the information ministry. We'll have to double check on that. But one thing is very clear tonight, and that is it does appear as if this is going to be another very heavy night of bombing in Baghdad and around the city. We were told that last night was one of the heaviest of the war, with many of the targets, of course, being Republican Guard command and control centers. And there's every indication here at Central Command tonight that it is another excellent night of flying and that they are hitting them hard again. In any case, farther south of Baghdad, you're right, the 101st has essentially taken over in the city of An-Najaf from the 3rd Infantry Division, as the 3rd Infantry Division starts moving north and seek and destroy missions to try to find some of the Republican Guard positions. It is now up to the 101st to essentially circle An-Najaf. There's every indication that they have, in fact, essentially isolated the city, but it is a city of more than 300,000 people, and a lot of questions tonight about exactly how they will proceed. Will they simply keep An-Najaf isolated, or will they attempt to go house by house, street by street? An-Najaf is significant in the sense because essentially all roads to Baghdad lead through An-Najaf. In fact, if you want to have key supply routes and whatnot. But it's also significant to Muslims because there are a number of holy sites there. In fact, there's a very large cemetery on the outskirts of the city, and there's some early indications that, in fact, some of the Iraqi soldiers have actually been hiding in that cemetery and trying to take pot shots from there. So it's a very difficult and complex operation for U.S. forces as they both try to root out some of these forces, but also as they attempt to try to keep some of the civilians as happy as possible. Lester?
David Schuster. David, thank you. MSNBC's coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom continues. When we come back, the latest on tough fighting in the Iraqi city of Nasiriya. We'll hear from reporters on the front lines. That's coming up next.
Wherever the story goes, we'll take you there.
The level of tension, if you will, has definitely stepped up. I mean, you can see we're back to wearing our bulletproof vests.
Enemy forces started moving on this camp from a number of different directions.
There has been constant artillery in this city for days now.
Wherever the story goes, we'll take you there. MSNBC.
Time now for the latest headlines. Just moments ago, new explosions and a massive fire in central Baghdad near the Ministry of Information. All day, the city has been hammered with airstrikes. Military officials say among the targets today were a training site for a paramilitary force and another presidential palace. It's unclear yet if the Ministry of Information was one of today's targets. The TV station is nearby this site as well. A total of 1,800 sorties were sent out. That's air missions over Iraq today. About 800 of those were actual strike missions. The military officials say an American Marine Huey helicopter crashed in southern Iraq at a forward refueling point. 3 Marines were killed. 1 was injured in the crash. Officials say the crash does not appear to have been caused by hostile fire. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said today that the U.S. has not found any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq because troops have not yet reached the area where they are stockpiled. He says Iraq's chemical weapons are stockpiled in Tikrit and Baghdad. Iraq denies having any chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. U.S. intelligence is looking into whether Saddam Hussein's first wife has left Baghdad. A senior U.S. official says there are reports that she is trying to get into Syria. U.S. intelligence sources say they know that Saddam's first wife and his daughters were at the presidential compound as late as March 19th. A reminder, we bring you the latest headlines on Iraq every 15 minutes right here on MSNBC. It appears U.S. forces are getting their first taste of urban warfare since the start of the war in Iraq. NBC's Kerry Sanders has more now from the front lines in Nasiriya.
I'm Kerry Sanders with the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. We're on the southern banks of the Euphrates River, just on the north side in the city of Nasiriya, in engagement with Cobra helicopter gunships and Iraqi soldiers. This is the first real picture that we've seen of the urban battle. These pictures were taken by NBC cameraman Sebastian Rich, who, at some considerable risk to himself, got into a position to show us what the battle looks like. Fired from those Cobra helicopter gunships, Zuni rockets and Hellfire missiles, taking out positions where the Fayadeen soldiers are holed up. When they reveal their positions with AK-47 fire or rocket-propelled grenade fire, those Hellfire missiles are fired directly at those positions, while on the ground across the Euphrates River, 50 caliber machine guns are fired in. This appears to be a snapshot of what the possible fight might look like in the urban center of Baghdad. General Rich Natonsky is here, and he had an opportunity to speak to us. Here are some of his comments.
We continue to press convoys up the road, as you saw yesterday, almost a daily occurrence. We continue to press a lot of supplies, fighting units all the way as they continue their move towards Baghdad. And this road is very critical. And those bridges that you probably have seen, I consider the most valuable bridges in Iraq, because we lost over 10 Marines grabbing those bridges. What you have are some radical elements of the Iraqi government, the Ba'ath Party, the Fedayeen, even some Republican Guard, pressing army units, regular army units that would probably rather surrender, but are being made to fight under gunpoint. And you've got all of these elements, including some mercenaries out there that are terrorizing the people and really just trying to interdict our operations. So it's been some very, very tough fighting. And if you were on the north side of the city, you would see some of our vehicles which took some real bad hits.
General Rich Natonsky, of course, is the one-star general who's commanding Task Force Tara, responsible for the battle right now that's taking place here for Nasiriya, a persistent fight against the Iraqi soldiers, although it appears to be that the Iraqi soldier threat now is dwindling. Kerry Sanders, NBC News, Nasiriya.
More signs it'll be another busy night in Baghdad. More reports of explosions and anti-aircraft gunfire. Maybe we can pop up whatever the best picture we have right now. There's the shot from Al Jazeera. I'll pause and see if there's anything still going on. We hear nothing there. But apparently within the last few moments, more explosions, more anti-aircraft fire in Baghdad. That follows the explosion we saw about a half hour ago in that building right in the center of Baghdad. We'll continue to watch the skies there through our various video feeds, but right now I want to talk in the war room about chemical warfare, which is becoming a greater threat as U.S. troops approach Baghdad. Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona is here to talk about it. Obviously, that's what brought us to where we are, is the threat that Iraqis have chemical weapons, and we keep hearing about these discoveries of chemical suits. I know that you were over there during the Iran-Iraq war. You've seen them work in that environment. Were Iraqi troops equipped with protective gear?
They were equipped with protective masks. At that time, their primary chemical warfare agent was sarin, which is a non-persistent nerve agent that dissipates very quickly. And it really doesn't hurt you on the skin too much. You have to breathe it in. Equipped with masks, everybody had a gas mask.
And so it's something and that's when they were using it as well. Did they ever receive it from the Iranian side?
There was some earlier use by the Iranians, but by far the Iraqis were the primary users.
Because if you use this stuff, you have to be prepared to inhale it if the wind shifts on you, presumably.
Exactly.
I want to talk about why they're being found in areas like Nasiriya. Well, the thought is, and even Defense Secretary Rumsfeld today said it would likely be in Tikrit or Baghdad.
Well, you remember about 2 weeks ago, they redefined the geographic military areas of Iraq.
Right, they cut in these military districts.
Right. The southern district headquarters was at Nasiriya, and this was the headquarters of General Ali Hassan al-Majid.
Chemical Ali, the U.S.
Also known as Chemical Ali because he was involved in the development of Iraq's chemical warfare doctrine and employment, and he was the one that ordered the use against the Iranians and against the Iraqis in Halabja. So this was his headquarters, and now we find chemical warfare suits and atropine injectors, the antidote, in his headquarters building, which was that hospital in Nasiriya.
The fact that they have not been used there, does it tell you that possibly the line of communications has been cut? You know, obviously, there's still question about Saddam Hussein. Would he be the one that would have to give the order?
Well, the actual execution order, of course, we believe resides solely with Saddam Hussein. And he may designate that down to lower commands, but we don't know if he has or not. And then the question becomes, will the officers ordered to execute that command actually do it?
And then where would they likely be? What units would likely have this stuff?
Well, it would be the artillery and rocket launcher forces of the Republican Guard.
And they could mix it in along with conventional explosives?
Well, that's how they used it before. To make chemical weapons effective, you got to use a lot of them. You have to get that agent out there where it creates this chemical cloud that you want to inflict on the enemy. And that requires a lot of artillery, a lot of rockets. And the Iraqis, in order to confuse the enemy and think they were under gas attack, they would mix chemical warfare and smoke rounds together, causing great confusion on the battlefield.
So we have not even seen a significant artillery exchange in this war yet, have we?
Not really.
That would likely come on any move in Baghdad.
We've seen some harassing fire down south on the supply lines, but we've not really engaged Republican Guard artillery units. Now, the 3rd Infantry is probably going to do that in the next few days.
We occasionally go to that camera in Baghdad, and in the background you hear the rumbles of bombs. A lot of them are falling south of Baghdad right now in Republican Guard positions. Is there a real fear here that you hit some of this stuff? You know, you hit an artillery unit there, and that may be the one that has these chemicals?
Right, and that's why they're being very careful about what units they're bombing with what types of weapons. For example, if you're going to go after an artillery unit and you're going to the storage area where they store the munitions, you're not going to want to strike that. What you want to do is take out the delivery systems, the artillery pieces and the multiple rocket launcher systems. The thought is that they will later on isolate those storage areas and decontaminate them separately, because if you do blow them up, you do run the risk of exposing a nerve agent into the atmosphere.
It was interesting the other night when the missile came in on Kuwait, even our correspondents had some chemical paper. They could immediately kind of test the air to make sure that there was nothing chemical. Right. Fair to say that's going on a lot right now in the battlefield with U.S. forces continue to sample the air?
Sure, because we've been ingrained that there's going to be chemical warfare usage here. So anytime there's a smoke round or there's any kind of explosion that doesn't look less like a high explosive round, you're going to probably mask and then take air samples and use these chemical papers to wipe.
All right. Rick Francona, thanks as always. We want to check in now with MSNBC's Christy Musumeci at our America's Bravest Wall. She has a look at some of the U.S. troops who are serving in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Christy?
Still facing them as they move closer to the capital. U.S.-led coalition forces opening up this all-important northern front with the help of B-52 bombers. 1,000 paratroopers landed in the north this weekend, and Kurdish fighters supporting our troops there up north. U.S.-led fighter pilots launching new bombs on the Iraqi Ministry of Information after midnight in downtown Baghdad. We showed you this earlier. And even earlier this evening, coalition forces dropping bombs in Baghdad, fires erupting throughout the city. U.S. fighter pilots softening up the Iraqi defense lines so we can move our coalition forces into the city. Hussein's men said to be dug in all around Baghdad. We have a new map, and this map shows you all the various Republican Guard divisions in position all around Baghdad. Let's see if we can get that new map up there so our viewers can see. These are all the different divisions of the Iraqi military, and this is exactly what the Pentagon is referring to when it says the fiercest fighting awaits us, but military officials have no doubts about the final outcome. And finally, we have 300,000 coalition troops, nearly that much, deployed in Operation Iraqi Freedom with reinforcements on the way. Some divisions as close as 50 miles from Baghdad, and as I mentioned earlier, some moving 10 miles closer into the city, toward the city. There now, Rita, you have the latest developments on our troops fighting in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'm Rebecca Gomez in Fox Central. Rita.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. Well, Iraqi television recognized for its fountain of propaganda, from heroic portrayals of the brutal dictator Saddam Hussein to the recent broadcast of several Americans killed execution style. The network, run by Saddam and his sons, is well known for its anti-American stance. So it was extremely unusual today when an American reporter appeared on Iraqi TV. Peter Arnett, who's covering the war for NBC and National Geographic, shared his opinions with the Iraqi people.
Clearly, the American war planners misjudged the determination of the Iraqi forces. Now, America is reappraising the battlefield, delaying the war maybe a week, and rewriting the war plan. The first war plan has failed because of Iraqi resistance. Now they're trying to write another war plan. It is clear that within the United States there's growing challenge to President Bush about the conduct of the war and also opposition to the war. So our reports about civilian casualties here, about the resistance of the Iraqi forces, are going back to the United States. It helps those who oppose the war and who challenge the policy to develop their arguments.
And joining us now to talk more about Arnett's Iraqi TV appearance, Liz Trotta from the Washington Times. Liz, you've known Peter Arnett for a long time.
Many years, since the Vietnam days.
What are your thoughts when you see this?
Well, I have to say, he's a very charming and lovely guy, et cetera, and a Pulitzer Prize.
Clearly the Iraqis think so too.
Right, exactly. I don't know what he's doing on Iraqi television. I mean, he's got to decide whether he's a performer or a journalist. But I must say, and I say it in sorrow more than anything else, that his track record on vis-a-vis America is a long one, and he's always on everybody else's other side. You must remember that this is a man who signed off and narrated a story that we used poison gas on our own prisoners in Laos. And it wrecked his career at CNN.
And then the baby factory,
that's
we
right.
can't forget about.
Why didn't anybody go ooh-ah when Tom Brokaw and MSNBC introduced him as though he were a solid citizen? I mean, in 12 years, I guess the memory was erased of what he had done. But most journalists, and I bet most women journalists, would not have had a comeback. So he has his comeback, and now what does he do? He's back at it again. He's out doing his anti-American number.
Let's talk about some of the things he didn't mention. I mean, he talked and basically said our reports, meaning his reports, helped bring attention to the poor Iraqi civilians. What he didn't mention was any American troops, didn't talk about, the problems with the American troops. Didn't also talk about the Newsday journalists who are out there who may be POWs.
Well, yes.
Didn't talk about the media getting kicked out. Said, look, the Iraqi Information Ministry has been so wonderful and gracious.
Peter likes to be an outrider, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some of the best journalists in the world, you want to be an outrider, you don't want to be in the group.
But the job as a journalist is both sides.
Unfortunately, he rides with the wrong people, but to appear on Iraqi national television saying this really just opens the whole thing and puts it right on the table. He's a tool of the propagandists. That's exactly what he is. And I mean, everybody else was thrown out of Baghdad. There he is playing cozy with Iraqi officials. I mean, from one standpoint, it's pathetic, and then it's also laughable that he can't keep up this act much longer, I don't think.
And real briefly, what kind of response? We have yet to hear a response because this just happened.
What kind of
I was going to say in the public, and let's also talk from the Pentagon and CENTCOM.
I hope he doesn't bump into some of those special forces troops who remember what he did to them on the sarin gas story in Laos, because they have it in for him.
It's going to be tough times ahead. All right.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Liz. We really appreciate you rushing in, and thank you very much. And make sure you stay with Fox News for our Fair and Balanced, showing both sides of the story on developments in Iraq. We will continue throughout the night. I will also be back at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 hours from now. I'll be back with my good friend Geraldo, who's out there, and we will continue our coverage now with Lori Dew with Operation Iraqi Freedom.